The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It's Friday, May the 22nd, 2026. We're live here on CHD TV. Coming up in this show, we're going to have Dr. Mumper coming on talking about Virginia and why they want to give 6-month-old babies and up the MMR vaccine. So very important conversation. And following that will be Dr. Brian Hooker with Doctors and Scientists. But first up, we are delighted to have with us this morning the president of MAHA Institute, Mark Gorton. Good morning, Mark.
Hello, Polly. Nice to be here.
It's great to be. Now, you're going to be talking about something very important today, which is MEVI. Now, a lot of our viewers have heard MEVI, but they don't know what it is. So can you tell us what it even stands for?
So MEVI is an acronym that stands for the Massive Epidemic of Vaccine Injury.
All right, and that's a real thing. And so tell us what you want to do with MEVI and how you want us to be involved.
So I view MEVI as an important communication tool. I mean, if you see in the world that we have, you have, MAHA, MAGA, these 4-letter acronyms that people understand. And the people at CHD have been fighting against the harms of vaccine injuries for years and have been talking about it, but the understanding in the broader public of just how big of a problem this is and that there is a massive epidemic of vaccine injury is something that most people don't know. So I believe by having the movement speak in terms of MEVI, speak in terms of an acronym, and also learn some of the key facts about the scope of the epidemic. So we now, in the past few years, there have been several studies that have come out that have large enough sample size in terms of these vax-unvax studies. Del Bigtree highlighted the Henry Ford study in his movie, An Inconvenient Study. You also have the Mawson study of Florida Medicaid data, large sample sizes that allow us to estimate with fairly, reasonable confidence the size and scope of the epidemic. So what we got from the Henry Ford study is a finding that 40% of all children are injured with a vaccine injury that is severe enough to require them to go see the doctor. So this is not a small thing. 40% of all kids, that's 1.4 million children each year being given a chronic condition by vaccines. And also, I think we as a movement need to do a better job of clearly articulating what vaccine injury looks like. Because if you get a measles vaccine, the side effect is not measles. The side effect is mostly neurological conditions and autoimmune conditions. So autism, ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities, tics, eczema, epilepsy. We have allergies. There's a large list of conditions. But basically, if a person in the United States has an autoimmune condition or a neurological condition, it is likely that was a vaccine injury. I think the best estimate is that about 70% of those conditions are vaccine injuries. And so this is huge. We talk about the epidemic of chronic disease, but you can talk about the epidemic of chronic disease without people realizing that it's related to vaccine injuries. And so I think we need to stop talking around the issues and stop using code words and say it very clearly that there is a massive epidemic of vaccine injury, because once people understand that unvaccinated kids are much healthier and that vaccinated kids have a host of very serious issues because of the vaccines, then regular people will start to look differently at vaccines and the medical profession and all of that. And you see in this day and age, we really have to be very direct with our messaging, and I think lead with our strongest points. And again, like the size and scope of the problem is so large. This is one of the largest health problems in the United States. And I don't think the movement has been doing a good job of articulating it clearly.
Well, we've been trying for years to talk about this, but of course we get blocked and censored. And one of the worst things that Facebook and places like that, they don't want the parents coming en masse to tell their stories. But so go back to MEVI, which I'm really excited about, because this has been a passion of mine for so long, and the parents around the world, because not just America's problem, it's a worldwide issue. What will happen with MEVI? So how can we get involved, and where is it? Is it going to go to the top, Mark? Because it's exhausting this, it keeps getting ignored. I know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is trying his hardest because we know him and we know that he believes our children and what happened to the parents. But we've got to see more action on this. We've got to see more informed consent. We've got to stop pediatricians being paid to vaccinate our children. The whole thing stinks. It's evil.
I mean, absolutely. But I do think that we can't expect people in government to be leading the change in public opinion. That really has to come from the advocates. And I think the people that have been fighting this fight the longest have been, conditioned to live in an environment where, you were getting canceled, you were getting shut down. And there's this attempt that if you could just kind of say things mildly enough, maybe you could kind of insert yourself into the conversation. I mean, you see that that's never going to happen. But we now have this radical change in the media ecosystem. You have podcasts, you have Substacks, and you have a large fraction of the population that are well aware that the health bureaucracy has been lying to them. So there's a lot of people that experienced vaccine injuries with the COVID vaccines and are now open to hearing that there are problems with the traditional children's vaccine schedule. But we have to say it clearly. And again, I think the movement has to say, yes, we're anti-vax. Vaccines cause all of these problems. I mean, you're looking at population-wide toxic metals poisoning due to injected aluminum and mercury from vaccines. I mean, this is real. I think a lot of people understand what toxic metals poisoning is. When you tell them, you're injecting large amounts of these toxic metals into little babies, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. And then you say, we know what toxic metals poisoning can do. It causes neurological conditions. It causes autoimmune conditions. These are the vaccine injuries. And say it really clearly. And I think part about using an acronym is that, it's so short that they almost have to quote it. You see the mainstream media would like to avoid repeating what we say, but if we say it repeatedly and there is a whole MEVI movement, they're going to have to discuss it. And as soon as you say MEVI and people are like, what's MEVI? Then you're like, it's the massive epidemic of vaccine injury. This will start to get in people's heads and will start to get them thinking about it. We're now at a point where it's really more of almost a messaging battle than a science battle. I mean, because you can argue about studies, but as soon as you start arguing about studies, 99% of the people just tune out. It really is about saying what, we all, who are, CHD supporters have known for quite a while, but saying it in a clear enough, strong enough way, and really speaking truth to power and confronting the doctors, the medical establishment, the people in health departments that are still with mandates. I think a lot of people, professionals in the health, they don't know. There has been so much censorship, such a blackout of information about the harms. So I think it's incumbent upon the advocates to learn the basics of how we explain this clearly, because there are some very strong studies, and just the facts that Gavin DeBecker's new book that tells the story of how the supposedly debunked link with the connection between autism and vaccines, that debunking was done by the exact same people who told us that Agent Orange was safe for soldiers in Vietnam and that burn pits in Iraq didn't cause cancer. I mean, this is literally the identical people who have been running junk science for the chemical industries, for the tobacco industry. It's the same playbook again. And we have such a compelling set of facts available to us that if we can get the CHD supporters who are out there to master, just 5 or 8 key bullet points and go in and tell people, I really think that we're gonna, can make a big difference, because the system is actually remarkably fragile in some ways, because it only can survive as long as it's capable of denying this. And as long as they've been able to get the people at CHD to say, I'm not anti-vax. As soon as you say, I'm not anti-vax, you've basically admitted that vaccines are so wonderful that they can't be criticized, and only unreasonable people would criticize them. Like, nobody wants to be anti-vax. I'm anti-vax because vaccines are so toxic and that their benefits are so small. I wish there was a magical medicine that cured, disease without that, but that's not the way it is. And there are these, we're sickening 1.4 million kids each year. It's massive. It's not small, and it's urgent. And we really need to confront this. And it's on the people who are watching CHD TV to move the Overton window as we talk about this stuff, to give the people in government safe space to do the work that they need to do. Because inside DC, where there are 2,000 pharma lobbyists crawling all over the place, that is not the place to lead in terms of vaccine messaging. The advocates need to get the public to understand what the problem is before we can expect government to bring out a solution.
Mark, that's great. And I'm super excited and proud of everything you're doing. I just want to say about the anti-vax thing. One of the reasons why ex-vaxxers, which we call ourselves, came up is because journalists would scream at us, you're anti-vax. Now, and here's the thing. They need to know that we did do what you told us to do. We did vaccinate our children because you told us it was safe and effective. So in our minds, anti-vax people are extremely smart people who did their research and have beautiful unvaccinated children. The ex-vaxxers like myself have completely injured children that will never live independently. Many of these children are dead, of the parents that I interviewed. So we want them to be held accountable that they told us to vaccinate and we didn't, and we will never touch a vaccine again. And that's why we call ourselves ex-vaxxers, because we don't want
I understand that, but I also think that, so the term anti-vax was developed by, pharma PR people. It's clearly, was designed as a derogative to dismiss the movement. But at the same time, the explanation that you just gave is long. And we're trying to, parse small terms. And that's not the way public messaging works. We need to be, talking in, 5, 8 word phrases. We need to count our syllables. And when someone says you're anti-vax, you're like, yes. And if you knew more about vaccines, you'd be anti-vax too. The educated people are anti-vax. Like, whether we like it or not, we have to own it, because until we own it, if there's something shameful about being anti-vax that makes people, refuse to accept the label, then, the people who are watching these conversations will see that we're projecting shame. Well, like, I'm not ashamed to be an anti-vaxxer. I know that, my wife would prefer I keep my voice down and not say it because you get canceled in New York for saying stuff like that. But I feel it's important to say it because there are so many children that are being injured each year. Again, 1.4 million kids in America. It's not a small thing. And we need to be proud and out there and really forward talking about this. And it's a change, because I feel, again, I'm relatively new to this movement, which maybe gives me a slightly different perspective. Like you said, the people like yourself, they were, compliant, just doing what their doctors did. They didn't sign up to be, warriors to, bash themselves against the system. And it's a lot to ask of people to do that. But at the same time, I feel like, we also have to recognize that public attitudes towards vaccines have changed so much in the last few years that the moment is right for us to change what we're talking about, how we talk, and to really center ourselves on truth and not be afraid to say it in the, shortest way possible. I mean, MEVI is 2 syllables. We're really at the, we need to get our message down to syllables and a handful of really strong facts that can, push back against the people, because most people who support vaccines are pretty ignorant about them. They just don't know. They're like, safe and effective, safe and effective. That's all they know. And,
Yeah, the whole what about polio thing. Okay, we could talk about this for ages. I just have one quick question, and that is, when we traveled on the bus, there was so much death. So you talk about massive epidemic of vaccine injury. Does that include the dead babies, the dead children?
I mean, so we certainly know that death is a side effect of vaccine injuries. Unfortunately, a lot of the studies, the best studies that are out there, don't look at death because those kids kind of fall out of the medical population. And it's been remarkably hard to get the records together. I mean, I know that Brian Hooker has just done a study, or is in the process of publishing a study from that he did in Louisiana that showed that kids that were vaccinated in their second month of life, or between the second and third month, have a 25% increased chance of death in the next 90 days. But as much as we know that death is a side effect from vaccines, it's much harder to put a specific number on that. And the fact that we have such strong evidence of harm that, again, it's the chronic conditions. I can say, 70% of chronic conditions are vaccine injuries, and it's 1.4 million kids a year, and it's 40% of all kids. I have not seen the numbers that let me estimate really what the size, the number of, kids that have died because of vaccines. We know it exists because we have a number of very specific anecdotes, but it just makes it hard for me to talk about it because I have to be so vague in how I say it. And it's tough. I mean, I would like to find a better way to talk about death, but I also think that, death is relatively rare compared to the chronic conditions. So, the chronic conditions by themselves are a massive enough problem that, that by itself is, should overwhelm the system right there.
Yeah, Mark, thank you for the work you're doing with MEVI, and it's really important, and we do appreciate it. And then to everybody out there, please go to MEVI, MEVI.org, and check out what they're doing over there. And thank you for all you're doing for MAHA Institute, Mark. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Polly.
All right, it's good to have you on this morning. Okay, everyone, now we're going to go to Dr. Mumper. Good morning, Dr. Mumper.
Hey. Hi, Polly. It's so good to be here again. Thank you for having me on to talk about this really important problem in Virginia.
Yeah, let's get up a headline now, Dr. Mumper. So measles outbreak in Buckingham County, that's one. And look, Virginia Department of Health launches measles dashboard as cases rise. Well, people might say, okay, well, measles, but this is different because, talk about it, but about what they want to do with the vaccines, the MMR.
Yeah, so there have been 40 cases of measles in Virginia this year. There was a little cluster of 12 cases in Buckingham County, which is about 45 minutes from where I live in Virginia. And none of the kids died. Only about 5 of the 40 ended up being hospitalized. But the response has been to suggest that we should give MMR vaccine as early as 6 months of age. So the first thing I want want to point out is that if you look at the package insert, it distinctly says that the rubella and mumps component have not been adequately studied under the age of 12 months. So that I perceive as a problem. But I've always been really concerned about the measles component. For me, I changed my career and got into the concerns about vaccine injuries and worked with kids with autism because I saw with my own eyes one of my patients regress at 15 months after I gave him an MMR vaccine. It was a beautiful, normal, developmentally appropriate African American male. And of course, I knew the story of your Billy. And about 23% of my patients say that their child's autism seemed to be affiliated with the MMR vaccine. So, one of my concerns is that by giving it at the age of 6 months, the babies don't often mount a good response. And so, about 25% of them aren't even going to make the antibodies. So, they're going to get all the disadvantages of the risks, which include things like neurologic dysfunction and thrombocytopenic purpura, which is a bleeding disease, and all the things that you've documented so well from your work on the Vaxxed bus and not get the advantage. So they're going to have another vaccine. And the recommendations are to wait at least 28 days between vaccines. And so they're going to end up with extra doses. And I'm concerned it's increasing their risk profile and not really give them benefits. The other thing I'm really concerned about is that the CDC's own data, which was reanalyzed by our own Brian Hooker, showed that when you give a vaccine at younger ages, especially to African American boys, their risks of autism are greater. And in fact, under the age of 3, and we're not even talking down to 6 months, but under the age of 3, African American males are 3 times more likely to have an autism diagnosis than those who got it above the age of 3. So all those things are very concerning to me.
Yeah, well, carry
Go
on.
ahead.
No, I was just saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Liz. No, okay, first of all, I just want to say this. So you and I have been in this whole advocacy, and you as a pediatrician, me as just a mum shouting out for, well, I've been in it for 29 years. I don't know how long you've been in it, fighting for this. And we started recording stories. And as I was saying to Mark Gordon, you heard about the death. I mean, the point is, the truth of the matter is we've interviewed parents whose babies have died from the MMR, died from it, not at 6 months, because that's not when it was given, from 12 months and over. So the truth of the matter is it not, Dr. Mumper, that your baby could actually die if it's given the vaccine, MMR vaccine at 6 months, and not to mention that other vaccines are given at 6 months. So you could be just in for a visit and they could just go, whoops, better give you one of these just to add on top.
So one of my concerns, Polly, is that deaths that come after vaccine are often misattributed to SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And if there was no connection with vaccines, then babies who die from SIDS would have sort of a steady progression throughout the month. But instead, what we see when we look at that critically is that about 75% of those babies, 78%, occur within the first 7 days post-vaccination. And so you shouldn't have this temporal association with a vaccine. The typical story for SIDS is, we took our baby to the pediatrician, they said everything was fine, and then all of a sudden our baby died. Well, somehow the medical community hasn't done a good job of saying what might have happened during this pediatrician visit that might have contributed to this death. And I think that is a real shame and needs to change. Many pediatricians don't recognize vaccine injury when it happens immediately, like a death, or when it plays out long term, like the striking increase in autoimmunity that we're seeing.
Also, Dr. Mumper, because Brian Hooker and I traveled down to the Mennonite community when there was measles down there. The other thing that parents need to know is, so the parent's freaking out, oh, I can't risk it. I can't risk my 6-month-old baby getting measles, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to go for the MMR. You need to know that it doesn't actually necessarily work, because Dr. Edwards, for example, has had numerous MMRs and he caught measles, as did Brian Hooker and various other people who had been vaccinated. Now, I got measles naturally as a child, and I mixed amongst all the people with measles and did not get measles. And so there's that to talk about, the fact that the MMR doesn't necessarily work. And also the other thing that we saw down there was tiny babies, Dr. Mumper, and we're not saying that's a great thing, but they got over it. They didn't die of measles. And nobody in the Mennonite community died of measles, despite what the press says.
And that's a very good point, Polly. So first of all, about 5% of children that get their first MMR do not seroconvert. That means they do not make antibodies. And that's one of the reasons that they give the booster at kindergarten. The other thing that's important to remember, though, is if you get measles vaccine, MMR vaccine, your immunity is going to wane in 11 to 13 years. You and I have lifelong immunity from having had measles and recovering from measles, but all the other people out there, like Brian Hooker, if they were young enough that they got MMR vaccine, their protection is gone. But the Mennonite community gives us a really good lesson in this. First of all, those 2 girls did not die directly of measles. We've looked at the records and they did not get the adequate care that they need. But one reason I think you saw those babies doing well is that the Mennonites historically eat whole good food. They eat vegetables. They are much less likely to have vitamin A deficiency. And for over 25 years, we've known that adequate vitamin A levels are protective against measles, that children do not die if they have adequate vitamin A. So the message I would give out if I were the health department director in Virginia is that everyone should have adequate vitamin A. The yellow, green vegetables, the red vegetables, the orange vegetables, they can take vitamin A for an infant, 2,500 international units, for older kids, 5,000. And if your child gets measles and you were my patient, I would give you 200,000 units of vitamin A for 2 days as soon as you presented with the measles. And those people do well with measles. It can be converted to a mild, easily survivable illness rather than being the subject of so much fear mongering. And Polly, I noticed we only have 3 more minutes. I want to get in a really important point about the advantages of having measles that I have not seen talked about in the media. There was a huge study in Japan. They looked at over 103,000 people and they followed them for 21 years. And what they found was that people who had measles as a child, a febrile illness with measles and or mumps, were actually 20% less likely to develop cardiovascular disease and to develop strokes. And cardiovascular disease and stroke are a huge part of the morbidity of our elderly in this country. So my concern is that as more people go to the MMR vaccine with its waning immunity, that contributes to cardiovascular disease. The other thing that measles protects against is cancer, which most people dread is the worst way to die. And we have documented studies, again, going back a long time, showing that you have less overall risk of cancer. The measles virus is actually called oncolysis, which means cancer splitting. And it is very important that we try to do everything we can to prevent cancer, because 1 in 2 of us are going to develop it. We have evidence that it helps against non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, against leukemia, and against ovarian cancer. So you do not hear the mainstream media talking about the advantages of recovering from a measles infection, but they are clear and they are documented. And again, you get lifelong immunity. So I am hoping to meet with the commissioner who is in charge of the health department in Virginia and share some of this data with them. And I appreciate us being able to have this conversation. I really want people to get out of their position of fear, which makes it harder for us to process information and to move into a place where they recognize that measles can be prevented and treated with something as simple as a vitamin that comes in our foods and in our supplements.
Dr. Mumper, it's so wonderful to hear you speak like that. Thank you for your honesty and truth. Bottom line is, back in my day, you went to measles parties. No one was afraid. It was labeled as a mild childhood illness. The doctor didn't even bother coming around to see you. You took a week off school. It was kind of fun. A little bit crazy for maybe 24 hours where you had a temperature. But outside of that, it was nothing. And I honestly, Dr. Mumper, I remember my mother being annoyed with me because I didn't catch measles at the measles party, which meant she'd have to take me out to another party to get measles. And we've gone from that to you're going to die. So I'm so glad that you're so honest and such a brilliant pediatrician and doing so much. Now, how can we help? What can we do with the situation in Virginia? Can we call people? Can we scream and
Well,
shout?
I don't know that yet because I'm hoping to set up this meeting, and I would like that meeting to be accompanied by letters from the public. So once Dr. Fury and I get that set up, I'll reach back out to CHD and maybe we can do a little campaign. I want to leave your viewers with something that is very dear to my heart. I take care of my beautiful 2-year-old granddaughter, and I will tell you that for that child, if I knew of a measles case where she lives, I would be taking her there. I'd put her under a dining room table with the child with measles. I'd put a big blanket around so that she'd breathe in that air. I would much rather she get measles than the MMR. And since she's so dear to me, I hope your viewers can appreciate what I'm saying when I say that.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Dr. Mumper. And I will say my grandchildren have already had measles and they've got through it and they're fine and they're strong. So, and there's a lot, I'm not going to name any names, but there's a lot of unvaccinated children that have already got measles here in America and they're doing fine. They're stronger than us. So please, people, do not be afraid of measles. Try and stay out of the hospitals. Seek good doctors in our movement. Dr. Ben Edwards is absolute expert on treating measles as well. So do not be afraid. I think Dr. Mumper, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Polly. It's so good to see you again. All the best.
Yeah, we'll hopefully get you back on again. All right, everybody, we're going to Doctors and Scientists with our very own Brian Hooker.
Morning, CHD. It's your host, Dr. Brian Hooker, not a medical doctor. I need to make that provision. I'm a real doctor. No, I didn't say that either. No, I have a PhD in biochemical engineering. So when I say Dr. Brian Hooker, that's what I mean. Welcome to Good Morning CHD, CHD TV, doctors and scientists. And my son, as you know, a lot of you know, has a vaccine injury and sustained a vaccine injury when he was 15 months old. And he could not articulate what happened to him. He doesn't remember what happened to him. Now that he's a speller, he can't really tell you what happened to him except for what his world was like after vaccine injury. So one of the first people that I met who articulated adult vaccine injury was one of my heroes in the movement, Eric Layden, who went through a horrible injury because of mercury in a tetanus shot. And joining that Hall of Fame for me is our guest today, Michelle Katz. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your vaccine injury story. There's so many people who are riveted by your very word because you can articulate, and you have articulated in your new book coming out on April 30th, Awakening in the Age of Metals, your journey through vaccine injury. So welcome to the show. With all that, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. As always, it's an honor and a pleasure to talk to you. You've been a hero of mine for a long time, as Children's Health Defense has during those grueling early years when I didn't know what was going on. You guys really shined a light for people like me.
in this marvelous book, Awakening in the Age of Metals, you basically have taken the moments where you were emotionally filleted and you've put them down on paper. And it's so important that people walk through that particular journey on paper. So why don't you start with your background and then what happened? What started this all?
Well, thank you, Brian. It means so much to me to hear somebody like you kind of reflect back the words to me, because you know it so well. You know it through the experience of your son, which is very close, but also in some ways, secondhand, because you're witnessing it as opposed to experiencing it. And that must be frustrating and nerve-wracking. And so I was a film and television producer. And at the time of the injury, I was a network executive, so very busy, very consumed by my schedule. And I also didn't have children at the time, and I was a long way from my own vaccinations. I was in my early 40s. So the subject of vaccines really never came up for me, and I never thought about it. And I certainly would never think getting one would be harmful. So one morning, I was getting ready for work. It sounds cliche, but I stepped on a nail. I tore the skin. I was bleeding a little bit. It took me a minute to kind of patch it up. When I got to work, I apologized. I said, I'm so sorry. Aside from the an hour and a half of traffic, I did step on a nail this morning, and kind of took me a minute to patch it up. And everybody really reacted in horror, like, you need to get a tetanus shot. You have to go now. Like, it's really important. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. I need to get a tetanus shot. Of course, that's what people do when they step on nails. So I went in, I got one. Nobody asked any questions. Nobody wanted to see any vaccine records or medical records or anything like that. It was just like, oh yeah, boom, on your way. And I really never thought twice about it until 3 years later. I had been bedridden with Mercury-induced dementia. I was in such severe cognitive decline that I couldn't do simple math. I couldn't really understand, I couldn't have a conversation like this. I couldn't understand questions and answers. I could hear what somebody was saying, but I couldn't actually put the answer together until many hours later, or sometimes days later, when I was able to piece together their question. I had crippling anxiety. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart palpitations. I was unable to walk without clutching onto the wall. I had severe POTS. I couldn't really walk safely. I couldn't get my balance. I would need the help of the wall or the edge of the bed or a dresser or something I could cling onto to get the short distance from my bed to the bathroom. And I, crying, incessant crying, violent. This was the weirdest thing. Violent images were flooding into me, and I'm not a violent person and I don't have a violent past. And I just couldn't understand what portal had opened up in my skull to be like a magnet for these violent and terrifying images. And food, I could only eat 3 foods by the time I saw my functional doctor. She remembered the other day. She said, do you remember when you could only eat green beans, sardines, and cranberries? And I was like, oh yeah, that was horrible.
That's not the buffet I would want to be at.
That's not the buffet anybody wants to be at. But and even that didn't feel great. Nothing felt great, but anything that I ate, especially sugars or grains, anything processed, eggs, dairy, anything like that would just launch me into, I'd be in a fetal position, crying, curled up in so much pain.
Right. Well, I want to point out you were, prior to getting the tetanus shot, and I'm assuming that it included diphtheria and pertussis, you were involved in the film industry, and you were a major film executive prior to this happening. I know this because I went to your IMDb webpage and look, that must have been excruciating.
Yes, well, actually, what I want to say is that I went back and I pulled my records because I remember Polly Tommey had told me that in California, they didn't give single-dose tetanus shots anymore. And so I was curious as to what kind of tetanus shot I did get. And I pulled the records, and it was a single-dose tetanus shot that I received.
Oh, so it was tetanus toxoid that had definitively, I think all of them had mercury then.
Definitively, it was a single-dose tetanus shot that I received in November of 2013. And yes, to answer your question, it was like my whole sense of self just kind of cracked from top to bottom, from left to right, from, every cell in my body and all of my belief systems just sort of withered away, because I think that sometimes if we work in certain industries, especially I'll say the film industry, you really do have this false sense of like what you say matters. Like somebody might listen to you. I mean, you have a voice and you might be able to get your point across. But what I found when this happened was that was a hard no.
It's so difficult to watch people go through these journeys of illness, and then so encouraging to see on the other side. But I mean, this was and is such a long journey for you. You went the natural healing route. How were you able to connect initially in order to get some type of relief, and how long did that take?
Well, that's a great question. I feel like that's the kind of like the clincher of this whole story, because it was really the before and the after. The before was just about 2 years and I'd say 6 months of just pure terror and horror when I had.
You thought you were going to die, and you very well could have.
Oh, there was no, in my mind, there was no instance in the world. Like I just felt like I knew that there was no other person in the world in history who had physically felt the way I did and then lived. Like that just was beyond my capacity for belief. So there was no doubt in my mind that if every single one of my organs was shutting down, that I would live. So that I just accepted, and I prayed for it, because that level of suffering mentally, cognitively, was beyond what I think a person could be asked to endure. It was certainly beyond what I felt I could endure. And thankfully, after 18 doctors in Los Angeles, either gaslighting me, dismissing me, ignoring me, or giving me psych drugs, I heard a podcast one night in the middle of the night. I probably couldn't sleep, and I probably was afraid. And so I was just rifling through podcasts to see if there was anybody who ever went through what I went through. And I did find a functional doctor in Austin who seemed to deal with what we were calling mysterious illnesses. And I asked a friend. She was able to help me get on a plane, because at that time traveling was pretty much a no, not possible for me. But I knew that if I didn't do this, I just knew in my soul that if I didn't see this woman, that was going to be the end of me. And as I wrote in my book, it wasn't like I was afraid to die. I was pretty much just afraid for all of the people who told themselves that it was all in my head, that they would write my story.
Oh my goodness.
So I was so selfishly motivated to live.
Was it this holistic practitioner then was able to kind of point you back to vaccines? Did you have a feeling beforehand that it was a vaccine injury? How did that ramify of, oh my goodness, what did I put in my body?
That's a great question. And that was a process. Okay. I went to that functional doctor. She took a test that nobody else had ever taken, which was measuring my levels of mercury and aluminum. Nobody, in almost 3 years, nobody had taken that one test. She gave me a provoked urine test. And I remember thinking, that's weird. Why is she testing me for mercury? But do I have a choice should I argue? Like, of course, I'm going to say yes. So even though it didn't really make sense to me at the time, I let her take the test, and she called me with the results, and she said, I've quite literally in my 20-year career have never seen levels this high. What did you do? How did this happen? And I was like, I don't know. She said, do you have silver fillings? I said, I do. I have many silver fillings, but I've had them since the late 70s.
Right.
So how could that be? How could that have suddenly overnight turned me into this person? And then thankfully, within a few weeks, I found somebody who I actually just interviewed on my podcast. Her name is Connie Fox. She's a mercury detox specialist, and she had her own nightmarish 7-year journey of mercury poisoning, and she coaches other people. She was healed through Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt.
So much respect for Dr. Klinghardt.
He's amazing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go right ahead. I didn't mean
No,
to interrupt. I just had to interject. I heard that name. He's done such absolutely amazing work.
He's amazing, and I'm really thankful to him because through him, I got to Connie Fox's method, and she survived through being healed by him. So she was able to give. So I signed on with her. She sent me a questionnaire. One of the questions was, have you recently had a vaccination? And I thought, well, that's weird. Mm-hmm. Why would she, why is that question relevant to my work with her? And then it was like big, light after light after light. And then I found the movie Trace Amounts.
Yes, that was the movie that was produced by Eric Gladden.
So we're talking, now probably the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, when I started to work with Connie, and and then I just went down the rabbit hole, everything I could find, and that movie really opened my entire mind. And then I really understood the autism connection, and then I really understood what was happening in the minds and the brains, because I will tell you, the minute my fillings came out, within 24 hours, those thoughts went away, the extreme anxiety went away, the heart palpitations in the middle of the night went away, the sweats went away, the constant crying and violent thoughts, all of that went away once the metal started to detox out of my body.
It sounds so close to autism. You almost want to call it adult onset autism, because the things that you describe in terms, to a T, in terms of that symptomology, I know are associated with autism, including sort of the psycho spiritual voices or whatever, and I do know that because of the work of heroes like mine, Dr. Christian Bogner, there's a connection between impaired metals metabolism in the gut and psychoactive substances appearing in the gut. I mean, people don't know that, but what you're describing, it's something that my son is describing and talking about sort of his normal everyday existence now that he can communicate as a 28-year-old. So it is so brilliant that you shared that, and it mimics so much autism. I'm sure you've made the connection already.
When I saw that movie, I just cried. I just bawled and wept, because I'm going to get emotional, but I, for the first time in my life, understood that there were thousands, if not millions, of children around the world who were experiencing something that was so devastating. And I'm so thankful that I did do justice in my book, but honestly, those words are still a shadow in many ways of what I actually went through. And it changed me in such a profound way, not just I think psychologically, because it led to this grand spiritual awakening that showed me that this message is far bigger and far more important than my story.
There are so many people where that has resonated, I'm sure, and will resonate with the launch of this very important book. How do you contend with going through this, walking through this valley of the shadow of death. I mean, and this was at least 3 years that you went through this symptomology before you got any relief, correct?
Yes, it was about 3 years, a little shy of 3 years before I got any relief, but it was it's been another 9 years. I'd say only recently, only in the past 6 months, have I gotten to the point where certain days I feel I'm in full recovery. So it was a very long and difficult journey, but I would say that the main kind of relief that made me know I could live,
Right.
I could live another day, came at about 3 years.
Incredible. And you've walked through this spiritual journey at the same time. What was that walk like? I mean, there must have been days that you were really angry at God.
Oh, I mean, it
I
has
don't want to
been.
put words in your mouth. Maybe I've been angry at God because of what my sons walked through. Let's just put it that way. So,
Well, I think the best way to answer that is really with the story of my lineage. That really does play a tremendous role. Both of my parents are Holocaust survivors,
Wow.
and I grew up with this fierce sense internally of right and wrong, and horror. Also, horror at the human condition for being able to stand by, for being able to be silent witnesses, which in my opinion is a collaborator.
Even in the Bible, I can never remember the address of this, that those that see the right thing to do and do not do it sin. We are ordained, and I don't want to get preachy on you, but we are ordained to do the right thing. I mean, that's just in our DNA. And so it's very difficult. And I think you capture it. It's very difficult to see people just stand by and, and see a calamity, see a tragedy. My goodness, the ultimate example is the Holocaust, and do nothing. That's very, very difficult.
Yeah, it was incredibly painful, I think, once this happened and once I realized what was happening and the silence that I was met with from my friends, family, doctors, people who you hope when a tragedy hits will be able to have your back. And I think that this epidemic of, I don't know, fear around speaking out and fear around not being part of the club, fear around being ejected from your social tribe. This hit me like a ton of bricks. It was through this journey, and I did go into the jungle many times, and I worked with indigenous shamans, and I worked with plant medicine, and something very, very unusual happened. I had what's called a shared death experience with my deceased father, who was a Holocaust survivor.
Oh my goodness.
I still had metals in me when I went into the jungle, but I was well enough to get down there, and I just knew that I needed some more, I guess, psychospiritual medicine to pull me through the rest of the chelation and the rest of the physical healing, and that there was something really deeply stuck inside of me that I needed to see. So I went to the jungle, and through one of my ceremonies, my father's death reappeared and his childhood trauma reappeared, and I lived it with him. I went through his entire childhood with him, so I was actually seeing and feeling and smelling. Anyway, it got so traumatic that they actually had to take me into a smaller back room where I wasn't going to be affecting other people's journeys, because I was truly traumatized. But it gave me a gift that I will never forget.
Yeah, and it is so important. I hear of these experiences with other individuals that are, there are clinical trials on this. Seeing people go through experiences where they take these types of medicines that they give a serotonin dump. I'm going to get nerdy on you. Sorry. They give a serotonin dump that allows these particular experiences to happen. What you described, Michelle. They're better on the other end. Absolutely. It might be traumatic, it may be difficult, but they are better on the other end. And so, this is real. And I have to reiterate that, because this is absolutely not the first time I've heard of this type of experience, and the need or the therapeutic value of walking through it.
Absolutely. And I used to qualify it all by saying, I know that, in the scientific world, this might be a little bit strange, but I had an interview with a Harvard neuroscientist, Dr. Eben Alexander, and we spoke about it. And he said, you know what you had, Michelle? You had a shared death experience, and that gave you the insight to why you went through what you went through, and how maybe you healed not just this generation, but previous generations.
I wouldn't doubt it whatsoever. I mean, we are spiritual beings, so when you go through that particular experience, you do not know what closure you're going to have for the previous generation. You absolutely, I mean, it's just a sort of a trust and faith. And it's interesting to hear that come from Dr. Alexander. Because these are our luminaries that tell. I'll never. One of the books that changed my son's trajectory and my thinking in the trajectory is a book called The Mind and the Brain. And we started putting my son's mind before his brain and allowing for his brain, realizing that it takes a while for your brain to catch up with where your mind is. But if you put your mind out there, and it was it was soulish, it was very spiritual. But tapping into that particular realm was of benefit. Me, a nerdy scientist that thought more in black and white. It was quite a journey. So I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you sharing those experiences absolutely in your book. I have I'm going to call this the last question because I want an exhaustive answer from it. Take us through the experience, and I know that this probably, even sharing this is traumatic, of the years and walking through the practitioners and having doors shut on you and being told that, essentially you're crazy, you need psych meds. What was that like? I mean, that had to have been very traumatic.
That was one of the more traumatic elements of the first 3 years, which encapsulated were the most traumatizing and confusing years of my entire life. Because when your brain isn't able to filter out the necessary elements to kind of keep you functioning, right. When your literal limbic system, which controls the autonomic nervous system, isn't functioning or is damaged in some way, then every interaction can feel unsafe. And you go to these people because they're the only medicine that you know, and they're the only kind of healing that you think is available. So I think that seeing the responses, and I wrote about it in my book, one doctor just looked at me kind of with nobody home. It was like nothing was registering, and all I wanted was somebody to say, either you're going to live, or you won't live with this, or the suffering's going to end, or I know what's going on, but it'll take a minute. Like anything that was remotely helpful or comforting would have been nice. But it was really quite the opposite. I remember one doctor, a gastro doctor I went to, and I said, I think, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I can tell that every time I eat something with gluten or grains in it, I'm really, really sick. And she said, well, how are you sick? And I said, I cry and I have migraines and I'm dizzy. She was like, well, that's definitely not celiac, so we won't test you for that. I said, but I think it might be, because when I don't eat gluten and grains, then I don't feel that way. And finally, I got her to test me. It did come up positive, because when you're in this high state of toxicity, there are a lot of things that go wrong in the gastro system, and they trip genes off. And this is one of the things that happened. And she looked at me and she said, people like you come to me all the time, and mainly we just send them off to other specialists and they never get better. I know you're not going to like that answer.
absolutely not going to like that answer. And what you've described, again, I want to take the parallel to the autism world, because what you've described is basically having your brain stripped off. So what is reacting and what is seeing is your limbic brain. So you're in fight or flight, or you're in misery. The emotions that you had to go through, having doors shut, being shuffled off between doctors, is that much worse because of the toxicity. It puts you in the limbic brain. And I hate to draw these parallels over and over again, but your lived experience is so absolutely important to, like you said, the thousands to millions that lived through this as infants.
When I think back to those experiences and the fact that I couldn't really advocate for myself, I mean, I just didn't really have the capacity to articulate. I just didn't. A, I didn't know then what I know now, but B, my physical brain was so impaired that I actually couldn't be my own advocate. I couldn't articulate things in the way that I needed to in order to get, I think, just the help that I needed. And one other experience I had, which is in my book, which was probably one of the most traumatizing experiences, was I ended up in the ER and I had a liver injury because I'd been given Tamaflu and then Tylenol, and this is still when I had the mercury inside of me.
Oh my goodness.
And that tripped something so horrendous off in me, and I went to the doctor and he took a liver panel of tests and he called me into his office and in a really disparaging way said, "Well, how long have you been using intravenous drugs?" And
What?
I said, I don't use intravenous drugs. What are you talking about? I said, well, you must, because you have Hep C. And I said, how does one get Hep C? And he told me, and I said, oh, I'm sure. I feel certain, sir, that I don't have Hep C. Would you, and this is a turning point in my story in the book where suddenly I heard the whispers of my intuition. I heard that faint voice say, Michelle, tell him to retest you.
Wow.
Tell him to retest you. He's mistaken. And I said in a very calm voice, you're mistaken. Please retest me. And in fact, I didn't have Hep C.
And no, you didn't have Hep C. Mercury toxicity makes other toxicity that much worse because your bucket of toxins is full. Your oxidative stress load is so horrible. Vaccines do that. Mercury does that. Aluminum does that. Michelle, thank you so much. Awakening in the Age of Metals is the title of the book. Where do people find out more about your story, your book, and your journey?
So thank you again, Brian, for taking this time to interview me today. I am just so honored and thrilled to be talking to you about this. It's really a dream in many ways. And people can find me. It's actually the website, the landing page where you can buy the book is www.awakeninginageofmetals.com. And my own website is michelleokatz.com. So that's www.michelleokatz.com. So if you want to buy the book, go straight to the landing page and you can buy either the Kindle or the paperback. And if you want to hear more about me, my coaching, I do metaphysical healing through story. I'm an abstract artist that helped my nervous system quite a bit while I was struggling, was to paint. And you can see my interviews and some of the films and television shows that I've produced. I'm like a film nerd when it comes to IMDb, and so I had to go to the website. Michelle, thank you so much for spending time with us. I look forward to a continued conversation with you. Let's please stay in touch, and just God bless you for just sharing your journey with us. Bless you, Brian. I thank you, and I really look forward to talking to you again.
My name is Richard Neil Hyde.
All right, and Richard, you took part in the AstraZeneca COVID shot trial.
That's correct. Yes, I did.
So my first question is, what on earth possessed you to do such a thing?
Well, actually, it was two. First, I wanted to get this pandemic over with, get back to real life, and secondly, I felt a duty to do this. Because I was supposed to have gone into the Army for the Vietnam War and I wasn't taken because it was over. And so I felt a duty to do this.
Duty to your country.
Yes.
Thank you. So what happened? Tell us what happened.
Well, actually, I took the first part of the vaccine in, December 17th of 2020. And nothing really happened at that time. And I took the second one around January. I don't have the exact date, but around January, a month later. And then February, I would say somewhere between the 11th and the 13th of February, I had a dizzy spell. All right, I've never had a dizzy spell in my life. In my life, I don't get dizzy. I don't pass out and I don't get dizzy. And I had a dizzy spell, and part of the trial and part of the paperwork stated that if I had any kind of reaction, any kind of medical condition that came up within a reasonable amount of time, I should call him. And so I called a Dr. Lee that was at the UT Texas Health Science Center to ask her about this dizzy spell, because part of the contract that I'd signed was that they would look into any unusual activity, such as, if I got sick or such. So this was approximately a month after my second dose. And she called me back, we talked for a while, and she basically told me, I'm old, and don't worry about it, and blow it off.
You're old? Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm 69 right now. I was probably about 67 at that time.
So that's considered old, and we're supposed to get dizzy?
Especially since I've never have gotten dizzy before in my life. And now, let's fast forward. June 1st of this year, I was out mowing the grass. I've been very vigorous all of my life. And June 1st of this year, I was taken to the emergency center, and I ended up with a heart pacemaker because I had bradycardia. All right. Now I started putting two and two together. I said, I got dizzy for the first time in my life about a year and a half earlier. I started noticing myself slowing down, and then next thing you know, I've got bradycardia and getting a pacemaker. My little friend right here, it keeps me alive now. But my whole life, I've been very active. Before the pandemic, I would swim 2 miles 3 or 4 times a week. I was in Boy Scouts. I was a scout leader. I'd hike, march. I mean, a 2 mile hike with a rucksack was nothing. And here I am, a few years later, I've got bradycardia, and I just can't figure out why. And the only thing I can say is that I started slowing down, having the dizziness shortly after the second shot. Now, my problem is not so much with the actual vaccine, because in the paperwork it does say there could be some side effects. Okay, so I'm somewhat good with that. But the contract stated that the UT Health Science Center would look after me if I have some sort of problem. So I'm thinking to myself that, either I had something coming on and they could have short-circuited this, got me into treatment. I mean, I had insurance, I would have paid for it, or either the vaccine did this to me. But it just seemed like it came on too quick.
So did you report the heart issue to them?
I did. I reported it to them, not on paperwork. I called them up. They said, call us. I called them up. The doctor called me at my home. We spoke a little bit, and that's when she told me I was getting old.
So that was the report?
That was it.
Just that.
And I don't know if
so they don't care?
Basically, yeah. I've got a contract that says they will look after me, they will investigate it, and if there's some problem, and I'm feeling, okay, if I had a heart condition coming on, they could have caught it at that time, and I may have not gotten to this position.
So before you start a trial, do they do a thorough workup on you to be healthy enough to do a trial?
Not really. I had a question and answer session. They took some blood work. That was about the size of it. But I take a physical every year. So there was nothing indicating on any physical up to that time that I had a problem.
Do they pay you to do this trial?
A very small amount. It mostly took care of my gasoline back and forth.
And can you just remind me, the AstraZeneca, which is like our Johnson & Johnson?
Correct. That's correct.
I mean, they only get one of those. Why did you have two?
No, it was a 2-shot procedure.
For the AstraZeneca.
That's for the AstraZeneca. And it was not the mRNA, it was the adenovirus carrier, I guess is what you call it.
Did you know any of the other people that were in the trial? Do you know how they got on with it?
No, I really don't.
So what do you think as you see, I know we don't have AstraZeneca here in America, but we do have it in England, and
Well, they do sell drugs here, just not the COVID.
just not the COVID-19 shot, right, but you were in the trial for the COVID-19,
That's
right?
correct. Mhm.
And you definitely had that, not a placebo.
Yes, I knew it immediately because I did have a reaction to it, and they unblinded everyone shortly. I'd say late February, March. They unblinded everyone. It was supposed to be a double-blind study,
Right.
and they unblinded everyone. It's like, come on in if you want a shot.
So basically, just for those that are listening and don't understand what that means, so you're taking a placebo,
Yes.
or you're taking the AstraZeneca and you don't really know, and then when he says they unblinded, they said to the people who didn't get the COVID shot, hey, you guys, you didn't get it, you need to come in and get it. So basically,
That's
that
exactly.
ruins the study.
They ruins the study.
Yeah.
That ruined the study right there. But I knew as soon as I took the vaccine, I had a reaction to it, so I knew I got the real deal. And then that later on they said, oh, you got it. They did come out and say you got the one the first time, the real vaccine.
So this experience that you've gone through, horrific. Now,
Yes.
does this make you now think about all vaccinations?
Oh, I have not got a flu vaccine this year. I have not taken any more COVID vaccines. I am really concerned about any kind of vaccine at this point because the government is not looking out for me.
And how is your health today?
Other than the pacemaker that I have, I would say fairly good, but I could not live without the pacemaker now.
Have you seen any of your friends or family or colleagues that did take a shot of some kind of COVID?
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
have you seen some injuries?
Well, actually, believe it or not, on the way up here, I was talking to my mother, and she just took her 4th shot. I asked her, please don't do this anymore, but she took her 4th one. I don't think I know anyone personally that's been injured, but I certainly read a lot. It seems like a lot of more younger people are having problems, dying. Well, I had a friend that died at 50.
You
Now,
don't mean having problems dying?
well, dying, yeah, that's a big
Dying
problem.
suddenly.
And dying suddenly. I had a friend out on the soccer. When I mean soccer, I'm talking about real soccer, not football. But on the soccer court, that just when I was in the hospital getting my pacemaker, he died on the court. Now I don't know if he got it, but 50 years old is a little bit too young to be dying in my book.
Absolutely. Well, is there any advice that you want to give our people that are watching? Is there anything you want to say to them?
I'd be very careful about taking any trials from now on. I won't participate in them any longer. And any vaccines, I'm going to investigate thoroughly before I take it.
Oh, okay. I'm going to give you a book when we go outside. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for doing this interview.
The incredible service members.
And we owe you our freedom.
The Pentagon is going to require vaccines for all service members.
I'm asking the Defense Department to look into how and when they will add COVID-19 to the list of vaccinations our armed forces must get.
Leaders did everything legal or illegal within their power to coerce and influence their service members to get the shot.
Her son and 9 other Marines were being held in confinement in the brig until they got vaccinated.
If you don't do what they tell you to do, they will ostracize you. They will destroy your life.
8,000 well-trained men and women were fired.
I lost my ability to feed my family.
I mean, I'm being told you're getting dishonorably discharged.
You cannot mandate an experimental medical product on military members.
The impact is really on the entire nation.
I had a battalion commander come to me and she said, "Dear God, we're killing our own soldiers."
When we talk about orders that are unlawful, now there is a duty to disobey.
But 46% of the American people say mandates are dangerous, they're damaging, and vaccine science isn't settled.
The steady decline of childhood vaccine rates.
Vaccination rates continued to decline last year.
There's a discourse about vaccines that didn't exist before.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense is the leader in the health freedom movement.
The Department of Health and Human Services is overhauling the immunization schedule, now only recommending 11.
We are making recommendations that are science-based, that are common sense.
Secretary Hegseth, discarding the mandatory flu vaccine requirement.
Your body, your faith, and your convictions are not negotiable.
People recognize you have to be able to make an individualized decision.
For the first time, the U.S. FDA will acknowledge that COVID-19 vaccines killed American children.
States are putting in place medical freedom laws. There's bills in Congress that Children's Health Defense is supporting, the GRACE Act for the right to religious exemptions, the End the Vaccine Carve-Out, ending liability protection, and Tom Massey's bill to repeal the PrEP Act.
One of the most aggressive medical accountability lawsuits in decades.
Suing the American Academy of Pediatrics.
CHD is suing under RICO laws, claiming that the AAP operates as a criminal enterprise and has for decades.
A federal judge yesterday blocked Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s recent overhaul of the nation's childhood vaccine schedule.
They basically just froze all vaccine policy.
The American Academy of Pediatrics and other medical groups filed a lawsuit arguing the vaccine changes violated federal law.
Which is outrageous for a single judge sitting in Boston to stop any work at the Centers for Disease Control related to vaccines.
This conflict between medical freedom and medical coercion, it's a fundamental conflict that we must resolve now in favor of medical freedom or forever be truly slaves to medical tyranny.
I am so glad that there are people like you who are still fighting this.
Children's Health Defense. If you don't know what they do, folks, look it up.
We have got to, as a society, global, decide, is medical coercion okay, or do you have a right to decide what happens to your body?
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.